good afternoon. Hope everybody's well. We are here on a Thursday afternoon for Deering Live. Thank you everybody for joining us. And we have a really fun time ahead of us today. So get straight to it. But before we jump right in, quick reminder, we do have the GHS strings that are brand new that you can go check out at deeringbanjos.com. But perhaps even cooler is for those of you that have been tuning into Deering Live during this time, we've got about 10 episodes up. So you can now see those. They've been archived and saved for you to look at whenever you please at deeringbanjos.com/Deering Live to its own dedicated page. So go there, check it out. Dan Walsh, Ryan Kavanaugh, Tony Trifter, David Holt, Valerie June from a few weeks ago, and everything that we do from here on out will be archived up there the following day, probably after we finish the stuff. So go check it out. Now, to this week's guest. This is really cool. I haven't seen this guy for about a year when we hung out at IBMA in 2019, which seems like such a long time ago. He's a fantastic three-finger style banjo player, taking influences from all over the map, from bluegrass, from classical, jazz, blues, and everything in between. He's also a banjo teacher, in fact, an adjunct lecturer of banjo at the University of North Carolina. Hank Smith, in case you hadn't realized who it was, performs widely around the country at times when we are not during a pandemic with Hank, Pattie, and the Current. And today we're going to be going into all things five-string banjo, as well as lesson tips and any questions you want to ask. He will be playing his Maple Blossom and hopefully his Crossfire. Welcome everybody, Mr. Hank Smith. Hank, how are you, man?
Good. How's it going?
Very well, very well.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun for sure.
And you're out in Raleigh, right?
I am in Raleigh.
Is it hot?
Not lately. We are currently getting the leftover rain from Hurricane Sally. And this past week, it's been in the 70s. It's actually been nice. The heat finally broke, and it looks to stay that way, hopefully.
Excellent. And then with us as always is Mr. David Banjowski. How you doing, Dave?
All right. How you doing? Good to be here.
Excellent. So we've got Louisiana, Raleigh, North Carolina, and San Diego, California. Welcome, everybody. And Hank, do you want to kick us off with the tune?
Sure.
All right.
Let's see. Let's do, here's a relatively new thing since the pandemic started. It's nameless as of yet, but it's in the style of an Irish jig for the band. So we'll see if I can pull this off.
What was the name of that again?
It doesn't have one yet.
Okay, that's brand new.
Yep.
Nice.
It's brand new. I inspired by Irish jigs and all that kind of stuff. I Haven't spent that much time in Ireland, really just at the Dublin airport for several hours. So, well, I don't know how strong my connection is to the country, but I do love the music.
Did it change time signatures in the middle of it?
It has some like little, not so much. It's still in four, but it has some accents and stuff in it when you get to so anticipations and stuff, and then when you get to the some of this stuff,
Right.
it's maintaining its, I guess 6/8, not 4/4. Sorry,
Yeah.
maintaining.
That's
its
what I
rhythm.
that's what I learned last week was the jig is 6/8 and
Yeah,
reel is 4/4.
right. That's right. So it's in the style of, not completely. It's got some extra bells and whistles, but we'll see what
Cool.
happens. We arranged it for the band. It was originally written in D, and Patty came to me and was like, "You got to do it in a different key." And I was like, "Okay." So we did it in A instead. So it's more fiddle conducive. Um, with the B, I don't know if I can do it in B. Oops. Guess not. So pretty similar. I guess it's modular enough. It'd be kind of fun to transpose it to different keys.
Right. Well, before we get into, because that kind of leads what you're saying, bringing a tune into the band. But before we get into the band and how this that kind of works in your group, why don't we just start out from scratch though, and you tell us a
Sure.
little bit of the history about yourself with the banjo and when you started and things like that.
Sure. Well, I didn't start playing until I was 16. Relatively late in life for a lot of kids who get started on music. I also am the son of Yankee expats raised in the South. I grew up in South Carolina, but everybody's from New York. We moved to South Carolina from New York State when I was 6 months old or so, and took up root in Florence, South Carolina. And so the music in the house growing up was classic rock, mostly Springsteen and Neil Diamond, Elton John, Bob Seger, stuff like that.
Right.
So I never really, and no one played an instrument. It was not a bluegrass family. So I didn't really have any exposure to anything like bluegrass or country unless it was on the radio. But when we were little, if I had to trace it back, when we were little kids, right before bed, we would watch the Dukes of Hazzard and Hee Haw. Came on back to back, and so it would have to have been the first time I would have heard a banjo and really picked up on it would have been Hee Haw when they were in the cornfield going, and then tell a joke. And then never really paid too much attention to it. Just thought it was cool, whatever. And then when I was in my teenage years, when I was 15, 16 or so, I thought I thought it sounded cool. I was like, something about that just sounds awesome compared to guitar. And some of my friends were learning guitar and whatnot, and to date myself, the popular music of the day to play on guitar was grunge. So it was all Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots and stuff like that. And so I thought the banjo itself sounded cool. What if I learned those songs on the banjo as like kind of a lark or something to do at parties or whatever, like not serious, learn dueling banjos or learn whatever, just to kind of bust it out like a parlor trick. And I got one for Christmas, and the rest is history. I mean, that was it. Like, I was hooked from the get-go and wanted to learn all the things. I'm sure my parents thought I was crazy. They may still think I'm crazy, but it's been 26 years, so I think they're accepting of it at this point. It's not a phase. But no, it was, and growing up where I did, I didn't have a teacher.
Right.
So I had to figure a lot of it out on my own, and in the days before YouTube videos, I just had a CD player and would play, generic bluegrass CDs. There was a bluegrass show on the radio where I was on Sundays, and I would listen to that and like tape it off the radio so I could go back and listen to it. And they had about 45 minutes south of where I was, they had a monthly bluegrass session. The Southeastern Bluegrass Association had a weekly or monthly rather festival and picking session. So that's kind of where I got started, was just playing in the picking session at the Lynch's River State Park and learning what I could, picking up what I could, that kind of thing. The first few months of banjo were rough. I didn't know that capos were a thing. I had no idea. I also didn't know that you could tune it to a different key other than G. So as I'm learning flat and scrugs and just traditional bluegrass stuff, I thought in order to play in B, you had to like just hold it.
Right.
Which you don't. And it's like, no, there's a clamp. And I'm like, oh wow, clamp, that's cool. And then I'm like, well, what do you do about Reuben? That song's hard to play in D. And I would go, and people will be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? And I'm like, how are you supposed to play it? You tune it to D. And I'm like, oh. So, I had to kind of figure it out. But by the time I got to college, after about a year and a half of playing banjo, there weren't really, none of my peer group was playing bluegrass.
Right.
Instead, it was a lot of like jazz and Grateful Dead and other stuff that was just being played. A lot of people in that community
But they're
where I went to
musicians.
school.
You're
Yeah.
hanging out with, yeah.
I went to a fairly small liberal arts school in South Carolina, Winthrop University, and it's a strong performing arts, visual and performing arts school. And so a lot of my friends, of course, the people that I would gravitate towards are other musicians, but they may be music majors and that kind of stuff. So they taught me jazz for the most part and classical music. And, the music that we would just go to each other's houses and jam would be, Grateful Dead tunes or jazz standards or whatever.
Right.
So I ended up learning all that stuff and then had to kind of relearn bluegrass from some old dudes in Charlotte. And learned a lot from them too. So it's just been an ongoing, ongoing thing. Try to absorb all the music.
Right. It's a similar path that I had, so that it rings a bell.
Yeah.
Did you have books? Because I learned from books. I didn't have a teacher.
I didn't have books. No, so I didn't really have much in the way of that. And like the any book I encountered would have been like the theory textbook from one of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, that stuff kind of went over my head. I was just kind of very experiential, just learning by ear exclusively and trying to figure out how to do all that stuff and spent, a ton of time practicing on my own and whatnot. But there was a fairly large community of people, of musicians that you could get together and play with at any point. So didn't really get into the books. I didn't really start to use books for learning until I started to teach professionally back in college at the end of my undergrad. When I would teach lessons to people, I found it more useful to have some kind of textbook. And the first book that I used was Pete Wernick's Bluegrass Banjo. That was like the one-stop shop for all the things that you would need, which is a solid manual for sure.
But you never had lessons per se, and
I had one lesson. My best friend in high school, her dad played banjo back in the day, and he showed me Dueling Banjos and Foggy Mountain Breakdown. Those were the two songs, and set me on my way. He loaded me up with a bunch of Flat and Scruggs records and bluegrass records and said, go for it. And then that's what happened. And then I didn't really get any kind of like
your picks and everything like that.
I had to just go. I mean, I played the picks that the original banjo came with. And then, you know what I mean? And there was a plastic thumb pick and metal finger picks. I think there were Dunlops. And just figured it out, like looking at pictures of other banjo players. Well, they're wearing it like this. And then I would go to the bluegrass session. They would kind of set me straight on some stuff. And the first few months of playing on your own, you're in a bubble and there's nothing to bounce it off of. I didn't have a metronome. I didn't have other people. So I was doing a bunch of stuff wrong. And by the time I got to the jam session, they were like, no, you got to do it like this. You should hold your hand like this. Your right hand needs to do this thing, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had to kind of unlearn a bunch of mistakes back in those days. But no, otherwise it's been, up until recently, I've been on my own.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. There's now it's almost, there's an overabundance of learning material out there. And it's
true. I mean, in the early mid to late 90s, in the 90s, there wasn't a whole lot. You had to go find it in a music store or a library or something, and now it's just so widespread. Which is
so good. Now you're teaching banjo and you're teaching at UNC, right?
That's right.
How long have you been doing that?
This is my third year, I think.
Okay.
Sixth semester. And it's great. I heard about it first when the music department at UNC put out a general call for a band director for a new bluegrass initiative that they were starting, that they got funded. And like other schools, like the most famous of which are ETSU and Berkeley, but there are a lot of other schools now
Hmm.
in various parts of the country that are doing bluegrass as some sort of added curriculum or major.
Right.
And UNC is still technically in its infancy a bit. You can't major in bluegrass. You can major in music and then track bluegrass performance or whatever.
Right.
And so when they first opened it up, they were looking for an instructor, a band instructor, to lead the bluegrass ensemble. And so a bunch of my friends were like, "You need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this." And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know that that's my gig. Like, I don't know that I'm the band director
Hmm.
necessarily." And so I didn't do anything about it. And the guy that they hired is absolutely the best person for the job. Like, he is head and shoulders better than I would have been in that gig for
Right.
sure.
Right.
And so UNC is super lucky to have him, which is really good. And then a year or so later, they were able to, with added funding, bring in other instruments. So banjo was the first thing, and
Okay.
then the following year it was fiddle.
Right.
And so when the banjo casting call came in, I was like, all right, I'll apply. I'll do it. And applied and interviewed, and they hired me, and it's been great. I love it. I love the environment, the students. It's definitely a very energetic and creative place to be,
Right.
especially on that part of campus. It's in the old part of campus where a lot of the more liberal artsy things exist. So it's very nice. It's picturesque, and I have a great relationship with the other faculty and everything. So it's really nice. I like it. Since we've been in lockdown, I've been able to teach my students online, which is good. I'm fortunate to be able to do that.
And they must be pretty advanced, serious students.
They are.
Right.
They are definitely uh, pretty advanced um, compared to some folks, but maybe not as much as others. I've got some really, really bright students, and I've had a lot of really bright students in the
Right.
past. So I'm super happy to be able to teach them what I know. Like, go ahead and do all the things, get involved in all the stuff you can, and jam with as many people as you can. Don't think of me as the sole authority on anything.
Right.
I'm just here to help you. You know what I mean? So they're great. It's really awesome.
So when you're teaching just your general private lessons and you're teaching a beginner, kind of, what are some of the things that you like to kind of really get them straight on that you didn't weren't straight on because you didn't have a teacher?
I'd say the main thing is their timing. That's one
Hmm.
of the primary things, is to make sure they're playing everything with good timing. Start practicing with a metronome on the first day, and then just try to gear it so that it's straightforward. So everybody gets the same thing more or less at the beginning.
Hmm.
Here are your rolls: forward, backward, alternating thumb rolls, stuff like that. And the basic two finger chords, C like this and D7.
Hmm.
And so one of the first exercises is just to roll, like forward, backward roll, pick your roll, and change chords on the beat. Very simple, foundational kind of stuff. One of the first songs they usually get is Cripple Creek. So we go through that and explain slides and pull-offs and hammer-ons and things.
Hmm.
And so it's really just a cumulative kind of start at the beginning process. I also try to cater my teaching style to the students' learning style,
Hmm.
so that they, don't have additional barriers to go through to be able to play and enjoy the instrument. So some people are super visual, some people are very, ear trained, or they might be really into the numbers aspect of it. They want to know more of the theory and all that kind of stuff. So we just try to cater it to get them going and
Right.
enjoying it, and then just kind of track their progress, feed them new stuff, the tunes that they'll learn as they go along in the first, you know, however many months to a year, are all vehicles for this or that technique or whatever. So, when they're first starting out, it's very much like baby deer in the woods, like standing up for the first time. You're just trying to get them to stay on their feet and move in a coordinated way so that their timing is good. And then once they get into more, different kinds of repertoire, we usually hit Blackberry Blossom pretty quickly to introduce melodic style. We'll do a single string slash rolling version of Whiskey Before Breakfast, so they get that in there, and just try to cover a bunch of bases at first. So then when they get into it and start getting better, they gravitate towards their own style. Like, I want to do this kind of, I want to do this, I want to do that, that kind of thing. But they get a little bit of everything, so they can be more, versatile with what they're doing. I also try to train people to play with others,
Right.
so that they can do that. And that's mostly the people that I'm working with aren't trying to be full-time pros.
Right. They just want to
There's
have fun.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, there's been a couple that a couple students that I've had that have gone on to play
Right.
full-time as professional musicians, which is great, because then that offers an opportunity for more of a continuing ed kind of experience, like, not just banjo knowledge, but like how to be in slash run a band, or
Yeah.
do's and don'ts of the road, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So one question that, as a teacher, I always see for beginning students is like how to change a chord from chord to chord in
Right.
time. You mentioned timing, but what are some of your tricks to get people over that little hump of not stopping to change to the
Right.
next chord
That's,
shape?
that's definitely a thing. We end up with like the BlackBerry that goes like,
Right.
I really harp on the metronome a lot, and like make sure you're slow it down at first.
Right.
Some songs, you have to play fast. They're harder to play slow, if that makes sense. They
Yeah,
want to be played
definitely.
fast. Plus, like, you're using different muscles to play fast than you are to play slow. So some tunes you have to kind of do that, but not until you have a handle on how to, like you said, change on the beat. So the main thing for me is like just make sure that your right hand roll is slow enough to give you enough time to get there, and like have your hand in place. Don't drop your hand. Sometimes they do that. They'll be like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Drop their hand and then come
Right.
back. It's like, no, keep it up there, and make sure that your posture is good. You're flat back against a chair. There's no arms. You're not laying on the couch. You're not
Right.
slumped. You're also putting plenty of arc in your hand, like all these little physiological things that can kind of help, so they're not like this trying to play chords. Little things like that make a big difference. I found micro movements and just being very hyper aware of how everything works in tandem.
Right.
And a lot of times you have to understand too that a lot of times these folks are A, doing this for the first time, and B, have never done anything like it. So sometimes people come in with guitar experience and they're good at changing chords.
Yeah.
But it takes them a while to get the right hand stuff.
Right.
And then the ones that come in with no experience, you just have to like really be patient with them and make sure that they're playing at the right tempo. I think that has a lot to do with it. And practice the technical stuff. I mean, there's a lot of muscle memory that has to happen, so you just have to be there and do it. Like when we go over accompaniment, chord boom chucks, the first step is just forming the chords in their different versions. And then the next step is like just to try to get you to switch your fingers and move. Like this thing right here, that subtle, tiny little movement is some of the hardest things for them to practice at first, because they've never done anything like it before. It's the left hand for right-handed people, and their pinky and ring finger have to be kind of the leader. And like these fingers don't do anything most of the time if you're right-handed. So like being able to just do this and like give them enough time to just do 4 of each and switch. And then as we start playing songs, like you start changing the chords that go along with that. So as you practice your melody, you immediately switch into chord changes and back again. So you get a complete picture of the tune.
What are some other common questions that come up with your students that you always, commonly have to address?
Questions that they ask.
That they ask, or that you notice, and they may not ask, but you might.
But you know to
point
do
out,
it.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with one of the things that does come up quite a bit that a lot of people don't realize, at least not consciously at first. When something is difficult, this is across the board. It's not just with banjo, but anything. If you were trying to screw something together, and if it was hard to do that, you would bear down harder on whatever it is. You're just trying to drive it in there. And so everybody's natural tendency, 100% of the time, is when something is hard, you tighten up. And this is the opposite of what you should do with banjo or any musical instrument. And what I found is that it's fairly obvious when you're playing and learning this, that you realize you might be playing too hard because it's really loud. Like your right hand is really giving it everything it's got. And so it's easy to be like, okay, back down your right hand a little bit so that you're not, crushing the strings. You don't have to press hard to make a lot of noise with a banjo. They make a lot of noise on their own. And what you need is dynamic control. So one of the little exercises that I give them right hand wise is to pick roll, any roll, and get it going at a medium tempo. It doesn't have to be fast. Medium volume. And then get quiet without slowing down. And then get louder without speeding up. And so once they can kind of ride the wave like that, then it's easier for them to back down off of their volume. But the other thing that happens that's more surprising, I think, for the students is the left hand. They crush it with their left hands. And they're just squeezing the life out of the banjo. And it's like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard are you? You can always tell because their hands are like this. Right. And it's like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard are you playing that? Oh, like an 8? And it's like, you need to be at like 4. Right. Like where it sounds like something. Like this is about as hard as it needs to be. If it's any less, you know what I mean?
Right.
But you don't have to.
Right. Yeah, we get customers sometimes say, the banjo, the intonation on the banjo is out. It's like, well, how hard are you playing? I hate to say it might be you, but it might be you.
Right, and the other thing is that you pull down. That's another thing when you're doing the closed shape chords. The tendency is to pull on it. You're like yanking down on the chord, so you end up with like all out of whack.
Right. Yeah. So many players don't think they have to press down to the fingerboard, not to the fret. So they're pushing really hard down to the fingerboard.
Yeah.
And they're like, my hands hurt. I'm like, well,
they're gonna hurt.
Right, they're gonna hurt.
It's gonna happen. Don't do that. But most of the time, the stuff that comes up, it's pretty uniform. Like people who have never touched the banjo before, more or less go through the same experience. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, and to a certain point. And then once they get past the hump, which tends to be a very muscle memory technical hump, and they are able to play songs and navigate tunes and chord changes and stuff like that fairly uniformly, then to me the real fun starts, because you can launch into all kinds of stuff, different techniques. They might be curious about the theory, how to build chords. They might want to learn jazz right away. They might want to learn like Earl Scruggs tunes note for note, including the solos, just to be super technical about it. They might want to learn how to write their own music, arrange their own music, that kind of stuff. They're adding banjo to their palette as something else to do. I had years ago, I had a student who was in beauty pageants. And she was like starting to age out of beauty pageants. I guess she was in her early 20s. And came to learn banjo because she wanted to do something different in the talent portion of the pageant. And so that was it. Like everybody's either a baton, in her words, everybody either sings, dances, or is a baton twirler. And that's it. And so I want to play banjo. And I was like, all right, cool. Like competitive banjo lessons. This is interesting. So everything we learned, we had to learn 90-second versions of, because that's how long she had to play through it. So if we're playing Clinch Mountain Backstep, you play it one time through, it's like 30 seconds. And so you have to like figure out a way to show her how to do stuff, like scripted solos and stuff like that. And I would, my usual spiel launch into like, here's how the chords work and here's why they are the way they. She's like, stop. I don't want to know any of that. I need 90-second versions of these songs, and that's it. And I was like, this will be easy.
Right.
And she was great. Like by the end of it, she had no idea what she was doing, but by the end of it, she was just destroying Clinch Mountain Backstep and stuff like that. I mean, just crushing. Like really good at it.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you could just really, if you just forget about the pageant part of it.
Did she win?
I don't know. I never went.
You didn't go?
I assume so. Probably. I mean, it's something so different like that. She never really talked about it though. She was just very hyper focused on the learning. I was like, that's cool.
And did you focus her on learning tab, or did you get her?
Yeah. So everybody starts out on tab. Sometimes though, you run into students, and this is where the adaptation of your teaching style helps.
Right.
is that the tab looks like Chinese, and so
Right.
they can't do anything with it, and they need numbers. And so a fascinating way to teach people songs, at least I think it's fascinating, it might be more common than not, but is that you'd use big number, little number, big integer, little integer, and it's like the big number refers to the string, so one,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5, and then the little number refers to the fret. And so you write out like it looks like algebra homework. Like you just write
Okay.
it all out.
The string of numbers, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and big number, little number, and it's just like a light goes off. Like they got it. Boom.
Oh, weird. I've never
No
heard of that
problem.
one. Yeah.
And I've had a student who one time I had to learn his language of understanding. I would try to use tabs. It was, again, Chinese. It didn't make sense to him. And so I would show him what to do, what the tab said. Like, I'm just showing you this. And then he would get out his piece of paper and write what I could only describe as like what looks like football plays. Like he would kind of have these lines that would represent the strings and like X's and O's and arrows going to it and all this kind of stuff. And it was just, it looked like Klingon. I was like, I have no idea what's happening there. That's some kind of hieroglyphics. That's crazy. But eventually, as we went through these songs and he kind of started doing it and explain what it was, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Let me write down the songs like that, at least kind of like that. And it made all the difference in the world. Like he was able to learn stuff so fast. He wasn't getting frustrated. He'd practice more. It was great. But tab, yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Is there a song that you played when you were first starting out, or not just starting out, but when the beginning part of when you were playing that you still like to play, that you still kind of come back to?
This might be controversial, but yeah, it's Blackberry Blossom, man.
Yeah,
Damn.
exactly.
I have a love-hate relationship with that song, but
Want to play it for us?
You'll give us a
sure,
rundown.
yeah, why not? So like, yeah, it's not exactly like my students play it, but it's based on it, so it's close enough. Let's see.
Very good.
Love that tune. You can do so much with it.
Yep. Yep.
Anyway, very nerdy. Or this thing like you can do it like that too, which is a lot of fun. It doesn't matter.
So we can talk about this a little bit. I mean, that was the first melodic style tune that I learned, and
Yeah.
so why don't you let people know what the melodic style is a little bit?
So melodic style emphasizes open strings, so that they ring against each other. So when you hear players like Jens, Bela, Tony Trishka, these guys are masters of the melodic style, and basically instead of keeping everything to a kind of a closed position or emphasizing the drive of the rhythm, like in traditional bluegrass, traditional bluegrass banjo, you might hear these kind of sounds. That kind of stuff. With what we were doing with Blackberry just now, you hear a lot of, which depends on how well you can run major scales and stuff together. So oops, I'm looking at, looks like I'm watching it in the mirror.
You're watching yourself.
So it just gives you like a different palette to paint with. It's all open, open ringing sounds. Again, like pointing to people like Jens and Bela and stuff that do this, masterfully. It's a really fun way to play, and it kind of matches the fiddle lines, I guess, in a way. I think that's how it was originally devised, was to be a closer representation of fiddle that you could get on the banjo. But what's cool about banjo in general, as it pertains to melodic style, is that there's so many ways to play the same thing, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And you can play any of that stuff in a closed way, but then you can also open everything up, and just to have that big full sound is really nice with a banjo, because a lot of times, the decay is so, you don't have a lot of time to get your point across. So you have to fill it up with a lot of notes. And I think doing that in the melodic style, you get a big, lush, full kind of sound, which is nice.
Mhm. One thing in the melodic style that always gave me trouble to get over the hump was because it's playing open strings up the neck. You know, you learn how to do it, but to improvise off of in the melodic style was very hard to get over that sort of hump, other than just playing something that you know is going to kind of work out.
Sure.
You have any tips on how to kind of get over that hump there?
I think the main thing with improvising in any case is listening, is to make
Hmm.
sure that you're listening more than you're doing. And then trying to apply the technique that you know the best to get the point across that you're trying to make. So in other words, you're not trying to play everything you know in every solo you take.
Right.
And so it, again, just like with everything else, it starts with a bit of technique that you have to learn. It helps to know your G major scale up and down the neck for sure. And you can kind of reduce that to positions just to get started. There's a lot of ways to do this, so I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, or even a singular way to do it. But and just try to connect phrases. Descending phrases tend to be easier for some reason. You can just kind of figure your way out of something. There's a finality to it, I guess. And then adding on different right hand techniques, whether you wanted to add a kind of thing to it, a little triplet lick, or you follow this more diatonic sort of pattern. Like all of that stuff is toolkit based. So that you practice this stuff to kind of make it automatic, so that when you're playing, your decision making has more to do with the melodic content than the actual technical thing that you're doing. So like if you were So just trying to stay kind of close to what the melody was ish. I mean, there was a little bit, it was a little licky
Sure.
in there, but just trying to kind of work the melody up and down so that you still hear the song in it. And I think that's what I usually try to impart to my students is like, start with the melody. When you're ready to improvise, like the melody is there for a reason. Play it, but play it a little differently. Variate. Here's how you variate. Change one thing, or you're going to change this thing into that thing and see if it fits. Substitution is a way to kind of get people started in that regard, where you teach them, here's a section of music, we're going to pull out what's there and you're going to put something in, and it's going to be related to what's already there, but it's a little bit different. And once you go down that rabbit hole, you start learning the theory about how all the things are connected and how it works, and you move into other spaces within that. Learning your diatonic harmony is very important, I think, for that kind of stuff, just so you understand how things can be templatized according to modes. And we're getting into some more, this might be more of an answer than you're looking for this, but that's sort of like how you end up down the rabbit hole. But ultimately, the main thing is listening. Like, how good are you at listening?
Yeah. One thing also I noticed when you're playing is you're fretting the fifth string with your thumb, which you know you never do. The other kind of when do you decide, use your thumb and not your finger, or do you alternate? Sometimes use your finger and sometimes use your thumb.
I mean, I think that has to do with where you are,
right?
Geographically on the fretboard. It helps to, sometimes you might be
right,
or you might want to kind of
right.
That sort of thing. I realized I am very dark in the video.
It's getting dark in there. Yeah. There you go.
It's also raining, so there's that. But anyway, so like the use of your thumb versus your finger might have to do more with, again, geographically where you are. Like here might be easier than this. But it just kind of depends on the person, depends on how big their hands are, depends on where you are on the banjo, that kind of thing. I have pretty big hands, so it's easy for me to stretch across and do that kind of stuff. Not out of like a heroic thing, it's just easier. So I think having the ability to use your thumb on this is beneficial to be able to again, expand your palette and what you can do with the instrument.
Right. I think every player, no matter what level you're at, finds themselves at points at a plateau where they don't feel like they're getting better, even if they're practicing, and they just start to get uninspired. Do you have any tips for kind of getting out of that sort of rut, that you can find in?
Oh, sure. I mean, I liken it to an uneven staircase. It's like at the beginning, sometimes you make like these great gains and it's awesome. And then all of a sudden there's a stair that's too big and you got to climb over it. But then the next one might be really small. So
Mm-hmm.
I think the main thing is when you get into those like plateaus, just understanding that it's not a steady up or down.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, layered like that. Knowing that kind of helps, but then the actual act of getting out of it usually depends on a shot in the arm of some kind, like a fresh set of inspiration before the common thing would be go see more music, go listen to live music more,
Mm-hmm.
or go to a jam session or both, or like try to interact with other players. If you feel like you're stuck doing this stuff on your own all the time, find people who are like you. And there are, point them towards different community-based things like here's this jam, here's this jam, here's this regular concert series. These guys are coming through town. Go check this out.
Mm-hmm.
She's really awesome. He's really awesome. That kind of thing. And that helps. But in the COVID times, I think just expanding what you're listening to and how you're listening to it can help. You got to gravitate your ear towards something. I think is important to be able to find the next thing you want to learn. You might just be in a rut. I'm with some of the stuff that I'm writing. At least one of the tunes, I'm up against a wall right now, just trying to figure out how to end the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you really just have to grind it out. You have to sit there and do it over and over and over again to push you past where you are. But then other times, there's the old if it don't fit, don't force it mentality. So it's like, well, let me just put this away for a second
Mm-hmm.
and think about something else. And so sometimes that means learning a totally different style of music or um, expanding what you're listening to include other styles of banjo music or whatever, or doing some like a deep dive into traditional stuff, or what is it that got you into this in the first place? Have
Mm-hmm.
you checked in with that lately? You know what I mean? And what are you listening to? What are your playlists? Does any of it have banjo in it? You'd be surprised how many students are like, yeah, I don't really listen to banjo music. And I'm like, well, how do you
Right.
expect?
Right. Right.
Gotta listen to something. And so that, that kind of stuff helps. Learn a different thing, learn a classical piece or learn a jazz tune or,
Right.
learn your chord theory or something like that and start to experiment with different chords and different shapes and progressions and stuff. And you'll find that there's a whole new way to do it. Like there could be a whole new set of sounds out there that you're not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of helps. So there's lots of different ways to do it. It definitely, the despair can be real for sure.
Yeah.
And I always just try to tell people that it passes. It'll pass. You just have to keep on keeping on. Don't give up.
Right. And you mentioned you're writing something. So have you been composing recently, and do you want to talk about that some?
Sure. It's been a very creative quarantine.
Uh-huh.
Just being able to sit here and compose. And I've been chipping away at 24 preludes in all 12 keys and relative minors for string quartet and banjo. So writing string quartets or preludes for string quartet. And
Are you writing the string quartet parts too?
um, for the most part, no.
Okay.
I'm composing, and then I work with an arranger
Okay.
who's really great, and he helps put it together with a lot of feedback and stuff. He's just much faster at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could do it with the music program, but it would take an eternity. It really would.
It'd
I'd
be a
still
lot
be
of
on the
trial and
first
error.
two. Yeah. Just trying to get all the parts right, but he can bang it out. So all I have to do is give him the score. I write down the
Yeah. Yeah.
tune, the score,
Tune.
and send it to him, and he puts it together based on the notes that I gave him on the piece, and comes back, and he's great. I mean, it's been really good, and I can't wait to hear real people play him because he sends me the MIDI files of the strings, and it's like, man, that's great. I just want to hear a human do it.
Is there any taste of that you can play for us? Does it work by itself, or do you need the whole?
Sure, yeah. So some of the preludes are standalone string quartets. I mean, I can play
Okay.
them all on banjo. They were all except for one or two were written on a banjo, and those other ones were written on the computer. One of which includes fingerings that are impossible, like
Right.
ridiculous stretches and stuff. But for the most part, they're all banjo centric. Let's see if I can. We'll try this one. This is the B major one. This is relatively new and could be a train wreck, so we'll see. This is exciting live TV, folks.
I
don't
don't
know
need
what's
to be on
gonna
the
happen.
spot, but go
This is
ahead.
it. Let's see. So let's see what happens. All right, here we go.
Yeah, that's very good. That's great.
Thanks, man. I composed it and edited it with some help from some friends, and have some new fingerings to learn. So that are easier fingerings. I just haven't learned them yet, so a little stumbly, but that's okay. It's new.
It definitely has, non-traditional fingerings going on in
Yes.
there. It's nice. It's always nice to hear fresh music on the banjo. Not
Awesome.
just
Thanks, man.
rehashing the
Thank
same
you.
thing.
And
And
I'm going to
then,
jump in real quick, if
yeah,
you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
go ahead.
Because I know composition, Hank, is a big thing for you. I think pre-COVID, you came out here. I think it was, I can't remember when it was now, but we filmed a bunch of videos with you.
It was in February.
I think it
So
was.
I have
Right? It was,
seen you within the year.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I was lying at the beginning, saying when he was there. So it was a memorable occasion at IBMA, which is why it stuck out. But composition is a huge part of what you talk about, and I think we have a whole video dedicated to it, as I said. So, can you talk a little bit about your approach to composition on the banjo, and how any tips for people that might be interested in doing it but just have no idea where to start?
Sure. It's worth mentioning that Jens Krueger is a very dear friend of mine and has taught me a lot about music and banjo and life in general. And I've been writing tunes since I started playing banjo, really, and have had plenty of recordings and things like that up to this point, or up to hanging out with him. But he kind of opened my eyes to other ways of doing it. So before Jens and I got together, I was very much kind of looking at it from the point of view of a scientist, experimenting with different things, trying different techniques out, and or trying to imitate stuff I heard. That was cool. I've been a fan of Bela's music, Bela Fleck's music, since the beginning, and for me, that, you know, when I first started playing banjo, I heard the Fleck tones before I heard Flat and Scruggs, and that was it. I was like, man, this is great. But I also knew that I had to start at the beginning and get to that point before I could ever play anything like that. And so, all along the way, as I'm trying to figure stuff out, I'm writing tunes that are kind of representative of me figuring things out. You know, like, oh, I just discovered whole tone scales, you know, 12 or so years ago. Let me write a tune with a whole tone thing in it. And that comes out, you know. Or I'm going to write a Latin tune. Or I'm going to write this, you know, jazzy number or this melodic thing in D or something like that. So you're just kind of just figuring out things based on what your ear is guiding you towards. So fast forward to 5 or so years ago when Jens and I started hanging out, his big thing, and I agree with, is the emotional connection. Before, the emotion served the technique. The technique came first in my mind because that was where my ear was being pulled. But with Jens, the emotion is most important and the technique is there to serve it. So what he had me do on one such occasion was, he's like, sit with, you know, he's like, you don't have any kids or anything like that. So like, think of your family, think of like the most warm thing you can think of before you compose. It helps to have a picture of them, you know, look at a picture of your family or whatever. And then remember something that happened that was really great, like a really great memory from your childhood or a place you went or something like that. And once you feel like you're full, then start to play and see what comes out. And it was fairly organic, like, you know, just sort of play what you feel, play what you hear, do what you've been doing. But here are some techniques that you can do to help bring the emotion out of the playing. And I think we covered some of that stuff in the videos that I did for you guys back in February that are on the World Wide Web at the moment. And some of that stuff is
page.
Yeah, and some of that is just technical information stuff that you can do. Like Ian says, there's a lot. If you can move the neck of the banjo in a way to get more of that out of there, and understand that even if you've just been playing for a little while and you know a few chords, you know enough to put something together. And it begins with that emotional connection to whatever it is that you're doing. So you're trying to evoke something. You want people to listen to it and hear it and say, this reminds me of, or while you were playing that, I thought of this or that or whatever. And it's no coincidence that when you go to a Krueger Brothers show, there isn't a dry eye in the house. I mean, they know how to do that to the ninth degree. It's great. So when you're just trying to like put together a song, one thing Jens was like, think of a dialogue, think of a conversation. You have a call, a response, and I think he used Salt Creek as the example first. Is sort of a statement, and then would be a question. And then you reiterate the first statement. And then the other person understands what you said. So it's basic call and response kind of stuff. And one of the first things he was like, just pick 2 chords. Pick 2 chords and put them together. And see how they interact with each other. Find all the places on the fretboard you can play those 2 chords. And apply different techniques to them. So at first maybe you'll pinch. So that kind of gives you an idea of where things are at. And then maybe you'll apply a different technique like a roll. And I'm not saying anything, I'm playing the same thing, just doing it in different areas on the neck, different inversions of the same 2 chords. So like, how do you make that into a conversation? How do you apply that to the Salt Creek example. And you can do it by position. If you need three things to be said, a call, a response, repetition, and then the resolution of it, then you can kind of treat it like that geographically. Again, this is all very mechanical. So you want to apply a fair amount of emotion to this stuff. You don't have to use a lot of crazy chords. You don't have to do a lot. And if you listen to his compositions, it's all based around very simple melodic ideas, very easy themes, things you can immediately go and hum. And that was another thing he emphasized quite a bit was, can you hum it? Can you listen to that? Can I play this tune for you and you know how to whistle it when we're done? If not, and that's what you're going for, and it's okay if it's not, because you can play anything. I mean, literally any kind of music is totally fine. But again, if you're just trying to get started with composing and hash out maybe something that you hear in your head, this is a way to do it. Think of it as a simple dialogue, whether you're using chords, individual notes, whatever. You can further reduce it to just play a simple melody on one string. Just use a few notes. As a call, the response can be, and then of course the resolution. So that's one way to do it, is just again, dialogue-based sort of way to approach composition. If you're going to do it with one string, then that gives you the opportunity to add harmony in such a way. So you could go. Just one extra note. Add a third extra note to make a, triad, a chord. If you wanted to change the way it sounded and keep the original melody, you just change the notes that are underneath the top part. So and all I did was make everything from a major to its relative minor. And that can, that alone can change up a lot of things, and you could do so much with just that. Other things, you're not limited to that. That will get you part of the way. There are plenty of other technical things that you can use. In that last piece I played, there's some pattern-based stuff that isn't apropos of like diatonic chord shapes or anything, this sort of thing. Or it's just real pattern which you can move around. That could be used to, to great effect. As a building block, as a thing. But again, the starting point is emotion, and if you're able to evoke a certain thing, people can listen to it and think, wow, that reminded me of whatever. I think that's where you're getting somewhere as far as like the listenability of it. But again, it's totally and completely subjective. So just because I'm doing it this way doesn't mean everybody has to.
That's right. I like the going back and forth on earlier in that segment you were talking about, maybe playing the chord as a pinch, and then maybe trying it the same thing but as a roll, and then maybe trying it, and again it changes the whole
right,
everything about it, the feel of it, the texture of it.
Totally. And you can say that it gives you the ability to sort of reiterate what you were trying to say a different way. It leads to different sections. You could change the key. If we were just doing it here, you could easily do the same sort of thing. You just change everything to a major key, and maybe like that. There's something there. It's very Baroque-y, but that's all right.
Brushes, right?
Do what?
Different brushes, different textures, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Different palette to paint with.
I like it. How much composition? Your band, Pattie the Current, which is I've seen a few times now, which is a lot of fun. We'll get onto the IBMA thing in just a second, but segueing into from that compositional standpoint, because you're not exactly straightforward. Like when the first time I saw you, I thought, oh, it's like progressive folk almost. Like it's almost like Dream Theater with banjos and mandolins and stuff. It's really, really cool. But it's how much composition goes into the band itself?
I mean, we mostly play our own stuff, one way or the other. Pattie and I write a lot of tunes. Billy has written a song or two with us. Stevie's new. He hasn't had a chance to yet. He's still learning all our stuff and/or contributing to the arrangements and stuff. But it's very much a collaborative process. It might be like, all right, I have this written thing. everybody learn it. Or I have a chord progression, a melody, and I'll send it to Patty, and she'll write the words to it. A lot of our tunes have been written like that, where I'll come up with a melody or an idea for a melody, and she'll kind of start to write words to it, and it's fleshed out as a song. It goes through a lot of iterations, a lot of arrangement, stuff like that. The one of the good things about this band is that everyone can more or less read music. I'm probably the junior member when it comes
Really?
to being able to read well. I wasn't trained on that. I don't know, I mean, I know how to read sheet music and stuff, but I'm not very quick. I have to go through it in my own pace and all that. But Patty, Billy, and Stevie are all classically trained musicians and can read really quickly. So as long as I write everything in tab and then convert it to standard notation, and then I can hand it to Patty or Billy or whoever, edit this make sense for the others. If I missed, some rhythm stuff or whatever, a marker here and there, and then it's easier to teach the song. That said, some of the stuff is more organic, like it's more just bluegrassy, not a hard chord progression or a deep arrangement. You just have to learn the song, how to play it like any other band would. But all in all, it's fairly collaborative. And since we've been in quarantine, we've been able to, we're all spread out. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Patty's in Greenville, North Carolina. Billy's in Durham, North Carolina. And Stevie's in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Wow. So we don't get together that much, but we are able to play together on the computer through a program called BandLab, which is sort of garage bandish, but it's web-based multi-tracking, so we can be wherever and just assemble songs together and assemble our videos and stuff. And so we're still able to create, we're still able to write new stuff. We've been working on new material while we've been locked down, so that's good. We're still productive.
Yeah. That's cool. And you I think you said right before we came on air that you listen to me on air like we have a TV show. Right before we went live, I should say, you had the opportunity to have one or two in-person rehearsals as well during the lockdown as well, which has been probably good for the sanity, I would think.
Yes, very big morale booster. And we had to, speaking of IBMA, we had to do our taping for that for what would be, the fest, the wide open bluegrass. So that day we were able to rehearse and eat mediocre pizza and, talk junk and then go play a gig. It was great. It felt like real life. And, we're just real fortunate to be able to do it for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about IBMA for a minute, because I know there's probably a few people watching that at least heard of it, maybe even attended every year. For those that don't know, IBMA and the World of Bluegrass specifically is the event that's held in Raleigh every year. It's coming up it's in a week or so, right?
A couple of weeks, yeah.
So obviously with everything going on, they've been forced to go into a virtual setting, just like most other things. And, it's on one hand, it's, for me personally, like I'm super bummed because it's one of my favorite events to go to. It's, get to hang out with you guys and see everybody else at the same time.
Yeah.
And Deering will be attending on a virtual level, but how is that working from a musician standpoint? It sounds like you're pre-recording everything. Are there any live streams, or is it all kind of pre-recorded and then sent out?
I think it's all pre-recorded as far as the performance and stuff goes. I think, music-wise, I have to go back and check and see what the website says and stuff. But for our part, we taped our set out in front of Memorial Hall where they have the award show. It was really cool to be able to do that all lit up. And I think they're going to broadcast it the Saturday of what would be Street Fest, Saturday of IBMA. I think. I don't know for sure yet. I think they're still working that stuff out. But it'll all be edited. It's been taped. I think everybody's done now, at least in the local area. I know they did a taping here and they did a taping in Nashville. So it's all going to be available via the Swap Card app, I think is how they're doing it. And
That's correct. Yeah.
It's free. I do know that you just have to sign up and get the app or whatever, or go to the website and you can watch it.
I'm going to put a link in the chat for anybody watching. So
I'll
put a link down in there on how you can sign up and everything like that in just a second.
it'll be a bummer that we can't play together, but I'm glad that we're able to do this because it's better than not doing it. I mean, so far since IBMA's been in Raleigh, so far hurricane hasn't been able to stop it, and a pandemic. So shy of civil war, I think we're all right.
Let's keep that up, Bay, shall we?
Yeah, let's shy of total breakdown. I think we're all right.
Absolutely. No, that's cool. Let's talk about your banjo for a bit.
Oh,
if you
sure.
don't mind. And then we'll go to some
Round
questions.
at this end, and then this was more of a stick.
It's like a lollipop, kind of upside down.
Yeah, it's like a drum with a stick.
Yeah. You're holding a maple blossom.
I am. So I had this. You guys built this banjo for me back in 2005, and it's been the road warrior for the last 15 years. And it's wonderful. It's customized. You guys put a thinner neck on it, so this is not as thick as it would be to match more of the Crossfire. So I have a Crossfire, so they feel alike in my hands. It also has a radius fingerboard, which is now stock, but at the time wasn't. It has a pickup, a couple other bells and whistles, and sounds amazing. I love it. While I was out there in February, we took it apart and put it back together again. Gave it some much needed TLC. And, that was in February. It's been almost 8 months. I'm probably going to have to send it back sooner than later.
We're ready.
I've been sitting here doing this for 10 hours a day for the last 6 months. So even though it's not performance playing, it's definitely, still playing it all the time. But yeah, no, this banjo is great. I have an old J.A. Jones pickup inside of it with a little metal sliver that sits right underneath the middle foot of the bridge, which you can't see.
Oh, yeah.
And then this gold tone mic, which is very nice. And that's the live rig, pretty much. I know. No, it's okay. They know I'm all deering. It's all
That's
good.
right. We're all good. We're all good. And then does it have the Wojcicki tone ring in it? I forget what you
Does
have.
it have the what?
The Krueger tone ring, the Wojcicki?
It does not. It has the stock tone ring at the time. I thought it did, but that was Chad confirmed that it is just it's the stock tone ring. But tonally, this thing sounds amazing. I mean, it is really just a wonderful instrument.
Yeah. No, we can't go on without talking about the other one lurking in the background there that you can't quite see. But I know everyone loves these. So let's talk about the mighty, mighty Crossfire.
Almost everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
One person I know.
Yeah, our buddy Chad is not a fan.
Sure.
So let's introduce the Crossfire to the world.
I don't know if you can hear this.
There you go.
So this Crossfire is now 21 years old.
Wow. Yeah, I always wanted one. I never got one, and I just never made the plunge of.
This was I wouldn't have been able to get one. This was my undergraduate college graduation present.
Uh-huh.
My parents were like, so we want to get you a laptop, but we know you want that banjo. which would you rather? I'm like, please, the laptop will be obsolete in 6 months.
Right.
Banjo is forever. Especially
right.
this one. This is the kind you sell your soul to play.
Yeah.
Halloween banjo. But no, this thing, I mean, this has been on every tour I've ever been on, just about, and is like a joy to play. If the Maple Blossom is a Bentley, this is a Corvette Stingray. Like, this thing wants to be cranked up and played. And I have at the moment, other than the factory stuff that it comes with, it has EMGs here, you guys know where they are, and I put a MIDI synth guitar pickup on it, and recently put the Julia Bell strings on it. It's still in G, but it's got JBs on it because you get a lot more sound out of them. I mean, they're really great for this because you don't have to play the electric hard,
Right.
At all. Like, you can have a pretty uniform attack the entire time, pretty low on that 1 to 10 scale we were talking about. It can be a 3 or a 4, just enough to kind of get the sound to come out, because you don't have to pull tone. You can turn it up as loud as you want and apply whatever effects. So for me, it acts like a different instrument, and when it's rolling, it rings a lot. Like it's got a lot more tone. There's not as much separation in the sounds than you would hear on the acoustic banjo. So like it's big. Like that's pretty big. It's of course there's some effects on it right now, but
Right.
even without all that, it's just dry. This is fairly dry. So still, it's got a lot to say
Mm-hmm.
as far as that goes. So for me, like this thing, it's almost like a different instrument. I mean, it operates like a banjo, but you can do things with it that you can't usually otherwise. And one of those things I think is like fast single string stuff. You can
Right.
like it's great for that,
Right.
even with the heavy strings on it.
Why do you think it's because you can play with a lighter touch and get a lot more sound?
Yep. It doesn't require you bear down on it, and it doesn't. You know, if you're doing long passages, long repeated passages, single string at speed on the acoustic, that's going to physically wear you out after a while. But this doesn't. You don't get as worn out as quick because you don't have to play as hard. It's great.
There's also more than like an electric guitar versus acoustic guitar. The notes, the duration of the note and the attack is smoother into each other. So that single string thing it's really hard on banjo to get it to sound smooth. It often sounds chunky.
It can be, yeah, kind of truncated or whatever. But with this one, it's not so much. And so, as a result, you can when you do use the melodic style open ringing strings, it can be used to great effect in that regard because you can kind of open it up and then close it like you would a piano, which is pretty cool. But it's a blast. It's a lot of fun. It hasn't gotten as much love lately because we haven't been performing, but I do play it when we had our weekly music series here in Raleigh, Beer and Banjos. I would play it every week at that because we could play different music. I'd try not to play bluegrass on this thing.
Yeah.
I've had to, like, when I send my banjo back to you guys to get worked on, this is the banjo that I end up playing. And so playing bluegrass on it is a little problematic at times,
Right.
especially live.
Well, again, like the note thing, like we just talked about, the notes, you don't get the separation of the notes as much, so they start to bleed into each other.
Yep, that they do.
Want to play for a tune for us on that?
Sure.
Give us a rendition.
Let's see. Let me know if it's too loud or not loud enough. Is that okay?
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. I don't know. We'll try.
Very nice. Is that an Alison Brown tune?
No, that's an original.
Okay.
Called De La Luz. Back in 1951, Earl Scruggs and I traveled back in time to hang out with Fidel Castro. We got in his DeLorean, rode down there, and we talked about cigars and music and stuff, and showed them bluegrass, and they showed us their stuff, and that's what came out.
Is that what you're thinking about when you're getting into that mode for composition? Fidel Castro and DeLoreans and
no, that all came. That's all stage banter. I think that was like before I mentioned. I think I'll sit here and write a Latin tune. I think that was what that was. It's called De La Luz, and it's fun to play. Again, it's like super shreddy. I don't know if this will translate to the Zoom, but we do have this too. This happens sometimes. I don't know if you can hear that. Is that coming through? Where you can go. So having like the drone to play off of is super cool. That's a lot of. Try to get funky with it, but
is that with the MIDI setup you're using that, or is that?
Yeah.
Famously pioneered by Mr. Flick.
Probably hear that one better. Or it's fun. It's too much fun, actually. You can make all the bleep bloop noises.
We'll have to bring Chad in on one of these and talk about future plans for the Crossfire. I've said it live now, so I've got no escaping. A couple of questions here from the wonderful, wonderful people in the chat who lots of people enjoying listening to you talk today. So thank you, Hank. First of all, any thoughts on claw hammer as a style? Do you ever get into that much?
I don't know how to do it very well. I can't really claw hammer. I got one lesson one time backstage at Gray Fox, and I in exchange gave that banjo player a 3-finger lesson, and that was the extent of it. So I think it's great people who can play claw hammer. It's awesome to hear. You know, Jens can do it really well. A good buddy of mine, Joe Newberry, is a great clawhammer player. Victor Furtado is a very innovative clawhammer player. And so it's nice to hear this part of the world, and where I live in North Carolina, there's a lot of old time music, and so you hear there's a lot more clawhammer players out in the world over here than in some other spots. And it's become, more popular over the years. It's definitely a very accessible way to approach the banjo in a folk style. So, props to anyone who can do it really well. I think it's great.
Just not what you focus on.
It's just not my thing. Sorry. And I get inquiries about clawhammer lessons, and I'm like, you could probably teach me at this point.
Do you have any advice? A couple of people asking about good places to go for online for tabs specifically. Is there anywhere that you recommend for people to go check out?
The standard answer to that is like Banjo Hangout or whatever, where they have tab libraries. But sometimes you have to search for stuff. Sometimes there's stuff that's been scanned in from old magazines, Banjo newsletter, stuff like that. And I think we're still sort of in the early days of compiling the real book, if you will. So back in the day when real books weren't published by Mel Bay or whoever, people would trade these things like Grateful Dead tapes, and so you would get like you would get a copy of the real book in whatever key for whatever instrument or something like that, but it was all fairly underground, and then they published it. And I don't know that we're there yet for banjo tabs. Like there isn't like a universal source yet, I don't think. If there is, I don't know about it, and I would like to. There are plenty of classical music databases. There's a lot of even Irish folk music and stuff like that, and then other forms, Bulgarian music and stuff like. There's a lot of that online you can find in different databases, but as far as banjo tabs and stuff go, there isn't as much out there. So that could be a project, waiting in the wings for someone who's industrious and wants to collect all that stuff. It would be really great. I think a lot of people are doing a great job collecting recordings for sure. There's a lot of that, but what you don't get as much of is the tabs to back them up.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get better about writing out all the stuff for other people as well. I do for my students. My students get inundated with tabs that I've written. But again, collected over time from people from certain databases. It's out there. It's just not in one place.
I guess for the more adventurous among them, half the challenge and the fun almost can be trying to write them yourself, trying to figure them
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and that's just it. So, sometimes like figuring out how to play banjo from a score, on a piano, a C is in one place. Middle C is right there in the center of the piano, but on a banjo, you got it here, and then it's here, and then it's here, all the same note. Which one is it? You know what I mean?
Right.
Which one am I supposed to play? So having scores converted to tabs and having just more tabs out there in general would be super helpful.
Sounds like a company that might want to take that on, David.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. New project. The Banjo Reserve asks, and this is actually an artist of questions too, which is cool, and we kind of touched on it. Can you ask Hank what his thoughts are on getting the best sound live and up on stage? Any special mic setup or any tips as far as
So
live
that's
sound?
what you're alluding to there at the Banjo Reserve is what we colloquially call gear hell. So you're getting into the nitty gritty of what you can and can't get away with. So my first foray into live sound professionally, trying to push my banjo into a PA speaker, was met with a lot of frustration because at the time the technology just wasn't there. I will say though, the Jones pickup that I have in my acoustic banjo is great. Combined with a mic to blend it, you get the full range of the sound, and that's fine, especially for only. If there's a drummer or some other loud instrument on stage, it's really hard to get the acoustic banjo to push and not feedback. So there's different combinations of things that I've tried over the years. I realize that it's different for everybody. This is one of them. This will push over any drum kit any day of the week, and you don't have to ever worry about it feeding back. That said, it doesn't sound as much like a banjo as the acoustic banjo does, right? So if you're trying to play, you have a banjo already, you don't have a Crossfire, you're not going to invest in one or find one someplace. You have a banjo and you want your existing banjo to sound good live, I would recommend a combination of pickup and mic some way, somehow. And learning your frequencies is very important. Learning what frequencies your banjo in particular sound the best in versus sound the worst in versus are problems versus it's like a sweet spot. And you find the sweet spot and you try to dial in as best as you can. And that's all well and good if you're by yourself. As soon as you throw other musicians in the mix, then your EQ essentially has to change so that it's not sucking up all of the air from someone else. So every instrument has its own spot. A lot of times in live settings in bluegrass, when instruments are plugged in, it's the banjo and the guitar that argue with each other because they share these three and middle register. And so a lot of times the mandolin and the fiddle can get away with their little spots. They're good up high, and the bass cuts through too. So in the middle range, it's tough to get it right, and that's where your EQ comes in. You have to know that because you might be playing your banjo on stage by yourself, and you may not like the way it sounds that much, but when it comes out with the rest of the sound, it's going to blend better if it's in its own little spot. That being said, you're still always striving to get the banjo to sound as good as it can, regardless of the situation. Um, it also helps to bring your own monitor engineer and sound engineer wherever you go. If you can't do that, then being able to communicate with the engineer that's on hand, that is pushing your buttons, it helps to know exactly how to communicate what you need with them. And knowing your frequencies is part of that, for sure. That's a big part of it. Also, knowing how to operate your own gear, because you're going to go through a bunch of it before you figure out what the right combination is and what you're going to rely on the most to get the job done and have it sound the same night after night. That's also the other thing, is the consistency, because nothing will ruin a gig like bad tone. Even if you know your stuff sounds good and you've worked it out at home and you've played it through other PA systems and you get to whatever club or situation and all of a sudden it doesn't sound like that, that can ruin it. I mean, it really can be a big letdown if your tone isn't the way you want it. So there's a certain amount of self-sufficiency that's involved in that. If you're playing acoustic and you don't have to worry about plugging stuff in or pushing over drums or a loud rock and roll situation, and you can get away with microphone like this. I have this guy, big condenser right here, ear trumpet mic. Yeah. Knowing how to use that mic is super crucial. Learning how to move in and out of the mic. Banjos tend to be really loud, so we don't have to get right up on it a lot of times. Whoever's singing typically is going to be right in the face of this kind of microphone. Sometimes banjo players in acoustic settings like that just have a little mic off to the side. Like you step into that when you want to take your solo and back off when you're not. And this way you don't have to crush it with your right hand or do all kinds of acrobatics to get it to sound in the mix. So learning how to work a mic is super important. And also, again, having an engineer that knows how to use those mics is also super important. So it's it's a thing that we all work on together. But there are many ways to dial in live sound, and it just takes a ton of time to figure that out.
It's important though. There's a lot of, I mean, I did it when I was coming up in bands and stuff, is that the idea that just because you have it dialed in your bedroom,
right,
or in your garage or something like that, that
right,
somehow it's going to sound exactly the same when you step on stage with 3 or 4 other
not
people,
even close,
and it's not even close, and it's like, why doesn't that sound so bad?
Right.
And it's true, it's very true. So understanding that and just having that open-mindedness is probably half the battle, because you're going to spend so much time dialing it in, trying to make it sound the same as your
and a lot of times people know what they're searching for. You know what I mean? Like what they want. Like they're like, I want it to sound like this. And I know for me, one of the early, I want it to sound like this was Alison Brown. Like that tone is the sweetest tone in the world. I mean, I couldn't believe it. The first time I heard her, I was like, that's exactly. And there's drums and a piano in the band. Like that is exactly what I want.
Player,
yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, granted, they're not playing rock and roll. They're not over there crushing it, but they are crushing it. So that's the thing. Like, I wanted it to sound like that. Bela's tone, of course, was always great. And Jens, like all of that. I'm like, man, what's it going to be? And Jens and I had a long talk about, banjo setup to get the tone you want. And it helps. I mean, I've done all kinds of things to the banjo to get it to sound the way I want it to. And he's helped me out quite a lot with that. And again, it's just a lot of trial and error, a lot of tweaking and trying to mess with different things. As we all know in the banjo world, there are a lot of parts. So every one of those parts can be tuned just about. So you have to sit there and mess with the thing to get it to the way you want it to sound acoustic first, and then find complementary electronics to get it to sound like it does otherwise and dial it in.
And for those of you curious about things like pickups and stuff, and microphone technique and that kind of thing. So on the pickup side, there's a few out there. EMG make one, I think Fishman make one. For Deering, we almost exclusively use Banjo pickups. We can put them in the head of anything from a good time all the way through to Sierras, Calicos, and up. Really, really easy, and they're passive, which means they don't take a battery, which means they're not likely to die in the middle of a set, which we really like.
That's happened with
this. Oh, I'm sure. That's the double 9-volt, isn't it? On the Crossfire.
It just has the one. No, there's just one in it. Yep. I mean, that 9-volt will last for like 7 years, but
yes, but it will run out halfway through that really important song that you're trying to play. Yes, as a bass player, I know exactly what that means. That's happened to me many times. The Yeah, so that on the pickup side. On the mic side, I will take this opportunity to give a quick teaser because hopefully in the next few weeks we have a series of videos coming out with our good friends at Royer Microphones and good friends at Compass Records. A series of videos on proper mic placement for banjo and all this kind of thing. So there's going to be also different things to look out for there. So I just had to drop that teaser in there for it as well.
No, that's
so
good. That's important.
It's
it's a public service announcement, is what it is.
I call it a shameless plug, I think.
Yes.
So, all right, that's cool. That's an hour and a half gone by in a flash. Dave, do you have any more questions and or final thoughts for the day?
No, I don't have any more questions. Just thanks for doing this, Hank. It was a lot of fun.
Sure. I'm happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
I think probably the most important thing we've got to talk about before we go there is your brand new range of scented candles.
Yes, this is right.
Can we address the Hank Pattie the Current Etsy shop real quick?
Yes, we can. So in times of plague and strife, everybody needs a side hustle, and we partnered with a local candle maker that makes soy vegan hand poured candles that are they give back to animal rescues. The company is called Wicks for Wags, and we consign to sell candles with our own custom labels. Hold on, I'll show the people at home.
Everyone can get a really good smell of this via Zoom.
Speaking of plugs,
over that branded candles.
So we have an Etsy page you can get your own candle, and if you don't see it on there, if you say, "Hey, do you have this scent?" email the people, and they can make it.
I just threw that in the link is in the chat, and I'll put it in the description for the video as well. And
it's been great. It's been great to work with this company, and the candle sell, and it's a weird merch item, of course. It's not T-shirts or CDs or hats or whatever. We do have all that stuff on the Etsy page, though. Just saying. And it's crazy as we move on into the digital world. You sell less CDs, which sucks because they're the highest quality, and people go nuts for other souvenirs, which is great. We love to see people in Hank and Pattie shirts, but having the candle line has been huge. It's helped us out in this pandemic. It's definitely helped keep the merch sales going, but at live shows, people love them. I mean, who doesn't want to feel relaxed? Can't
argue with that.
Plus, they do good. They do a good thing. They give back to animal rescues, and it helps our furry friends.
Absolutely. Well, we got a lot of Hank Pattie and the Current fans here at the company too, including our man Sam, a repair technician who worked with you, I think, and will probably do your banjo when it comes in next time.
Oh yeah.
So he's often seen parading his Hank Pattie and the Current T-shirt around the building. I don't know that we're going to be okay in California burning a scented candle in the middle of the workplace.
No, I wouldn't do that right now.
No, but he may well pick one up.
I wouldn't do that right now.
That was a lot of fun, Hank. That was really, really good. And,
thanks, guys.
So, for anybody wanting to see them, there's a bunch of videos on our YouTube page of the band playing some stuff. They will be performing at World Bluegrass IBMA. There is a link in the chat here. I encourage everyone to go check that out because Deering's there and Bourgeois Guitars are there, and I think the Krueger brothers are playing, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Real life. It's going to be awesome.
It's just like real life, just from the comfort of your own home. And then buy a scented candle. Support artists.
Or a shirt if you like shirts, or a CD.
There you go.
Or what have you. Just say hi.
I know you put your banjo down, but you want to play us out real quick?
Sure. I was just switching.
Oh, you were switching.
Sure. Let's see. What can I play? People will enjoy.
And remember, everybody, this video will be available to watch on the new page,
Nice.
deeringbanjos.com/DeeringLive, with all of the other episodes that we have. And we've got some cool stuff coming up. IBMA, like I say, is in 2 weeks, and we've got a multitude of videos that particular week. And Dave, am I right in saying that next week we've got Mr. Don Flemons of
cool.
I believe so. I just have to check the calendar, but
yes, but we'll be emailing out about that. I'm 99% sure that's correct. So, Hank, what do you got for us, my friend?
So I thought I was just running down a list of things. I thought maybe an oldie but a goodie would be good. This is a tune I wrote a long time ago. That's maybe appropriate for these times, called Nervous Breakdown. So this is that.
All right.
Almost made it.
Beautiful thing. All right, everybody, stay safe out there. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, guys.
See you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.